Okay, so we were talking about the almost sacrifice of Isaac. I want to go over what we said, one of the things we said last time, because it was a little complicated, and draw a conclusion from it. Hashem says to Abraham, please take your son. So the question was asked, rightly, why did it say please? The creator of the universe doesn't have to ask permission, doesn't have to ask for favors. And indeed, if you think about it, the creator issued orders to the first people that he created, and he issued an order to Abraham about circumcision, didn't ask his permission, and then he issued orders to the non-Jewish world in general. And there's another example of where he sort of asked permission, and that was before giving the Torah at Sinai, where he sent a message to us through Moses. The Creator has a Torah, and he wants to know whether you'd like to receive it. And there too the question is raised, he's offering us this opportunity. He's not really going to make it up to us, because afterwards he put the mountain over our heads and said, well, if you don't receive it, you're going to die here. So, but it sounds like that, and so when it happens, it's rare, and one has to appreciate that something special is going on. Now, the explanation was that Hashem set Abraham up in a contradiction. On the one hand, he told him prior that Isaac will be his continuation. And on the other hand, he tells him here that he should offer him as a sacrifice before he has any children. And that's an absolute contradiction. What do you do if you're faced with contradictory instructions? You realize you can't satisfy both of them. And since they're coming from the same source, they have the same authority backing them, the best you could do is do one or the other. You might look at the consequences, you might look at the severity, and so forth and so on. Suppose you don't know. Isaac will be your continuation. This is how the Jewish people is going to be brought into being. Jewish people is going to carry God's name in the world. This is the way it's going to happen. That seems to be pretty important, pretty central. He's the one from whom the Jewish people is going to be descended. On the other hand, God says, I want you to perform a sacrifice. At this point, Abraham is completely stymied. He has no way to understand what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from him. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, please, because he says, even after I give you the command, you're not clearly obligated to fulfill it, because against the command is something else that I gave you, which was a statement about your future. So I can't make a binding command in this case. It's a very interesting situation where, in logic, even the Creator has limits to what he can do. And there are limits. And whether that bothers people theologically, there's many limits on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we should talk about that. It's an interesting general subject. But here, he can't clearly obligate Abraham to do it, because he's already contradicted that particular action with his own declaration. So please is, I know you have two alternatives, and I know neither one can bind you to the exclusion of the other one, but I'm asking you to do this one. If you don't, I can't hold it against you. According to what we said in the Ran and the Shlo, it can't be held against him. And this means, of course, sometimes you hear people say, oh, he knew it wasn't going to really happen, or he knew he wouldn't really die, or be resurrected right away, and it wouldn't really be a loss, and that's why he could do it. No, absolutely not. If so, there wouldn't be any contradiction. Of course he should do it, because Isaac will be his continuation. No, he saw no way in which it could be reconciled. And the Shlo says that the reason he chose is a reason I'm using my words now, it's a reason for volunteering. It's not a reason which would require him to do it, it's a reason for volunteering. And that is that it's the action that carries the greater self-transcendence. Now, the idea of self-transcendence is a fundamental Jewish idea. And I would say the simple way to look at it is, when you do something and you think, why am I doing this? Where's it coming from? Where's my motivation coming from? What am I trying to accomplish by doing it? When you tell that story of where you're coming from, how much in that story is you and how much in that story is the Creator? Self-transcendence means more of the story is the Creator than it is of you. I'll give you an example of how this works. This is a famous example in the Gemara. There are two different categories of mitzvahs. I mean, there are 16 categories, or 142 categories, but I'm just singling out these two for discussion at the moment, which Chazal single out as well. Some commandments are absolutely obligated. Because Baruch Hu says, I order you to do this. If you do it, you'll be rewarded, and if you don't do it, you'll be punished. This I want done. That's one type of commandment. That's called mitzvah va'osa, commanded, and he does it. The other is where Kodesh Baruch Hu says, I'm inviting you to do this. If you do it, you'll be rewarded, but if you don't, I don't mind. And there'll be no penalty. So I'm inviting you, so to speak, to volunteer. That's called Ein mitzvah va'osa. He's not commanded, but he does it anyway. For both, there's a reward, but it's not equal. When I ask people who don't know the right answer, I always get a certain answer. Which do you think would be more precious? Something which you are commanded and ordered to do, and you do it, versus something where you're invited to volunteer, and you volunteer and do it. Which would be the more precious performance? Which would deserve the greater reward? Usually, people say, where I'm invited and where I volunteer. Where I volunteer, it shows how much I care about the project, how much I appreciate the project, how much I value the opportunity and the outcome. Whereas, if I'm ordered to do it, it shows that I'm obedient, dutiful. But surely, the moral character that it shows when you volunteer is much grander than just, okay, I take orders and I fulfill the orders. And the commentators, especially the Ritva, say, those words which you say to explain why volunteering is more important, they are the very words which prove that volunteering is less important. Because, turn the thing off. Takes its own time going off. Because if you listen carefully in the description of the motivation of volunteering, you'll hear one word over and over again. Why am I volunteering? Because I appreciate the value of it. Because I do it out of the sense of opportunity. Because I'm expressing the nobility of my character. Which word repeated over and over again? Yeah, how about the word I? Every sentence began with I. The focus is on I. Who am I? What am I doing? What am I accomplishing? What does it mean to me? What am I showing about myself? Dutifulness, fulfilling obligations, yes, I do show that I'm loyal or I'm responsible and I'm obedient, but the obedience shows itself in doing the will of an other. So that if in the volunteering case it's 70% me and 30% God, in the obligatory case it's 90% God and 10% me. And that's what makes it more precious. And in fact, you do get a greater reward from it. The Ritva goes so far as to say, he says that the obligatory one is the greater one. He said, and even so, and then he quotes the idea of being a chassid, even so, someone who does it as a chassid, looking to do more and to volunteer, even so, he does get some reward. Don't think he's ignored entirely. No, he's not ignored entirely. He does get some reward. All the words of being a chassid, which we would use to think it was superior, he thinks of it as the second prize, second place. So the picture here is the picture of living out what God wants from me. And clearly, if God says to me, do X, if you do it, I'll reward you, and if you don't, I'll punish you, God has a bigger stake in that than when he says, I invite you to do X. If you do X, I'll reward you, but if you don't, I don't mind. I won't punish you. Obviously, God has a bigger stake in the first one. So if that's the case, that's going to be the superior one. So this is one way to look at the mental set of Abraham. Okay, I have these two alternatives. Living with the proposition that Isaac will be my continuation is really good for me, isn't it? I don't have to kill my son. My son will live and have fulfilled that divine imperative that he should be the continuation. If I sacrifice him, I'm going to lose that. I'll fulfill the other divine imperative, and I'm going to lose that. Which one has more of me in it, and which one has less of me in it? Obviously, not performing sacrifice and allowing him to live and see him have his children and all the rest has much more of me in it than performing the sacrifice. So Abraham reaches for the volunteer in order to be able to respond to God's pleas. But what motivates him is that this is the greater self-transcendence. Yeah.
Abraham has already gone through 9 tests, plus, his life is very difficult. Obviously, this test is the test of all tests, but he could have said, look how much I've already done. I'm going to take option A and keep the only thing I care about, my son.
Okay, so let's work with that. You're saying a very good question. Since he's already passed 9 tests, so then he could say, okay, that's enough already, and I'm not going to do the 10th, right? So then there's the other explanation of the word please, which we have in the rabbinic tradition, where Kodesh Baruch Hu says, please stand for me in the 10th test, so that it will not be said that the first 9 weren't significant. That they weren't significant. So here, in a certain sense, that statement in Chazal is addressing your question. No, the first 9 can't stand on their own, because the first 9 are subject to a misinterpretation which would minimize them, which would degrade them. And through the 10th, he's going to undo that misinterpretation and show the greatness of the first 9 also. And it's very important because people don't read this Chazal typically very carefully. It doesn't just say the 10th is harder than the other 9, that it'll overshadow them, that it'll earn him more merit. It doesn't just say that. It says it'll rehabilitate the first 9. People will say the first 9, lo hoya behem mamish, there wasn't anything really significant there, and this will help undo that misinterpretation. What would they have against the first 9? So if you look at the first 9, you'll see that in each case, God asks Abraham to do something which he can understand. It's a value that he can understand and identify with. So the onlooker could say, look, Abraham is a noble figure. He has high values. He thinks in grand terms. And he's willing to sacrifice for his values. So when God tells him to do it, his reaction is, oh yeah, I believe in that. I think that's very important, and I'll do it. How much of it, I see now I can use the same vocabulary I used 2.5 minutes ago. How much in his performance is God, and how much in his performance is himself? Well, if they are values that he believes in, then there's a lot of himself in the performance. And God's commands sort of comes like, when a rabbi signs on the kashrus or something, the rabbi didn't make it kosher. The rabbi just testified that it's kosher. Right? So the Chazal say what Hashem told Abraham was this: People could misunderstand the first 9 as just acting out on your own noble values. They won't see your dedication to me in them. So I'm going to give you a test this time where your noble values won't help you. Your noble values won't help you. Because you won't understand why we're doing it. You won't understand what its purpose is. So you can't say, no one could say, you identified with that and saw that as a good outcome, an outcome that you thought was precious, and therefore you acted for it. No, and on the contrary, it contradicts what you've been promised. So here, the split between himself and God is like the 90-10. And that's what Hashem wants to show. And then the reasonable interpreter will say, well, if Abraham did it here, clearly he didn't develop that character on the spot when this command was given to him. Obviously, that's the kind of person that he was. Then you go back to the first 9 and say they weren't done just because they expressed his values. They did them because he did them because the Kodesh Baruch Hu wanted them. Even if they hadn't expressed his values, he would have done them. That rehabilitates the first 9. So that's why saying that I did the first 9 isn't going to help, because Chazal see that having just done the first 9, he wouldn't have made the impression on the world that Kodesh Baruch Hu wanted him to make. Now, I told you last time at the end, a midrash, an interpretation of the midrash, and some people were shocked. So let's try to talk about that. You asked, I think, his wife died, came home to find that she had died, and had to eulogize her, bury her. They couldn't share it together. It's true, certainly true, and the way we live life, and the way we look forward to life, it's something which needs to be addressed. Let me give a parallel, just show you that this is not an isolated phenomenon. Jacob went to get married. He went to Haran, to his mother's brother, and there were 2 girls there, Leah and Rachel. And Jacob wanted to marry Rachel. We should put in that he was a prophet at that time, and so therefore when he looked at her, he saw in her what normal people wouldn't ordinarily see, and he wanted to marry Rachel. He worked 7 years for her, and then Rachel knew that her father was going to deceive Yaakov, and on the wedding night, to put in Leah, the older sister. And Yaakov had anticipated this and given Leah given Rachel special signs, so that when they get together that night, he could check who it was. And she gave the signs to Leah. What was the result of that? Well, the result of that was Yaakov married both of them, 2 sisters. Torah law doesn't allow that, does it? To marry 2 sisters. How did he do that? Aren't we told that the patriarchs all kept the Torah before it was given? Yes, we are. The Ramban answers that the patriarchs volunteered to keep the Torah only in the land of Israel, not outside the land of Israel. And Haran is outside the land of Israel. That's how he got married to the 2 sisters there. Okay, now comes another 7 years when he pays off the phony debt that he has to pay for marrying Rachel. And in 6 more years, he's with Lavan until the crisis comes, and he leaves, and then he goes back to the land of Israel. So it's 7, and 6 is 13, and maybe there's another year when he was in Sukkot, and then when he comes back to the land of Israel, Rachel dies. Rachel dies. That means he only has 13 or 14 years with her. That's a very short time for a marriage which he thought was going to be a lifetime. Rachel also gave up giving birth to all the tribes of Israel. She ended up with 2 instead of 12. Look what Rachel gave up. She gave up decades and decades of living with Yaakov. That also should be taken into account. Look what she gave up. So I want to try to broaden your perspective a little bit on making decisions to give things up. You probably haven't been in any of these situations, but there are people who have. And maybe through identifying with their experiences, you can get a broader understanding of this phenomenon. During the Second World War, the Allies were fighting against the Nazis. American Army drafted 2 million men more into the army to go and fight the Nazis. There were rules for drafting. I don't know what they were exactly, a certain age and certain health, so forth and so on. There were people who were exempt according to the rules and wanted to volunteer. So they could find something for them to do. And they asked them, why do you want to volunteer? And they said, fighting the Nazis is the most important thing that could be possibly done now. They can't win. We can't allow them to win. I can't sit on the sidelines and just watch it happen. I have to do it. There's nothing more important than that. Some of these people were sent into combat. Some maybe even died. You ask a person, you're risking your life. And he says, I know. I know, because this is worth risking your life for, to make sure the Nazis don't win. Maybe you can hear that. Or Walter Reed, probably heard of the Walter Reed Hospital, Veterans Hospital. Walter Reed was a doctor, and he. אני מלמד עכשיו. And at that time, he was trying to eradicate yellow fever. And he did research and discovered, turn the phone off. He did research and he discovered that it was carried by mosquitoes. And people didn't believe him. So he infected himself. He did it in front of people so they could testify to it. He had the mosquito bite him and he got the disease. People died from that disease. He could have died. He risked his life. They asked him, you're risking your life, are you crazy? He said, listen, people have to know this. They know it's carried by mosquitoes. They can do something to eradicate the mosquitoes. They could save thousands and thousands of lives. Yeah, it's worth risking my life in order to help rid the world of this disease, which is killing lots and lots of people. So it's not crazy for a person to think, yeah, there are certain things for which I would indeed risk my life. Now you take a mother whose child runs into the street and the car is bearing down on the child, and the mother will run into the street. Even a father will do it also. I shouldn't be too sexist about this. Will run into the street to save the child. Will the father get hit? Will he not get hit? He's not calculating the trajectory. Oh yeah, I'll have 2 extra seconds. Okay, I can make it and get him. No. His thought is, get the child out of the way. And what happens, happens. Is it worth risking your life for a child? Maybe. Maybe. There are certain things that are really worth risking. Or, for example, in wartime, when the grenade is thrown into a group of soldiers, and one soldier falls on the grenade to smother the explosion with his body so the other ones won't be killed. That happens. So, it's not as if preserving your life trumps everything. There are times when there are certain values that are worth giving your life for. Now, if you absorb that idea, if it's an idea that you take seriously, now the other thing to do, which I don't think I'm able to do, is to impress you with the idea that when Kodesh Baruch Hu gives you an opportunity to demonstrate something in the world that will carry Kodesh Baruch Hu's presence into the world, that's also worth giving up your life for. So we have certain crimes. Here there's a bit of a moral side to it which can help. We have certain crimes for which one has to allow oneself to be killed rather than violate. So, if someone says to a Jew, I want you to kill that Jew, and if you don't, I'm going to kill you. And the Jew says, if you're prepared to kill me, why don't you just kill him and leave me out of it? He says, no, you see, I understand, I'm short-sighted, and I can't see the target, but you're good. You have good sight, I know. And you can see the target. I can't do it. So pull the trigger or you're dead. Well, the rule is you can't do it. You have to die rather than commit murder. You can't use the fact that your life is in danger to allow yourself to commit murder, to kill somebody else. And there I think we hear it, who am I to decide that I should live and he should not live? Huh? So I have to allow, I can't take his life to save my life. Same thing is true with idol worship. Idol worship, when a Jew performs an act of idol worship, it carries such a destructive force into the world. Now, this is a destructive force that you can't see. It's not like a typhoon or a tsunami or an earthquake, but it carries into the world such a destructive force that the Torah says you have to give up your life rather than perform an act of idol worship. There, you have to take it on the grounds of the Torah's description of a world that you can't see, but that world is real. So here, we're talking about the idea of human sacrifice. Now, the question is, what is that sacrifice supposed to accomplish? What is sacrifice supposed to accomplish anyhow? So we spoke about this once. In the ancient world, sacrifices are economic. You give to the gods what they want, and they give to you what you want. Why the gods, who have control over war and peace, and life and death, and fruitfulness, and weather, why they need wine, I don't know. Why can't they get some wine for themselves? Why can't they brew their own wine? Okay, that's what they want. They want wine, they want fattened bullocks, they want fine flour, and you give them, and it's a trade. That's there when you talk about killing a person, you're really pushing the envelope. If they threaten you with a plague where many people are going to die, like Rite of Spring by Stravinsky, right? If they threaten with a plague, so then, of course, you make the calculation, better one should die than many should die. Okay, then one can talk about that calculation. But when we're talking about the creator of the universe, as it says, all the animals of the forest belong to me. Li kol chai sayar. So you're not giving me anything when you sacrifice something to me. I have everything. The idea of a sacrifice is to bring the person closer to Hashem and to demonstrate what Hashem's place is in the world. For example, we have sacrifices of the first product of a productive process. So the first fruits each year of each tree are brought to the temple as a sacrifice. It's a certain sense of sacrifice, bikurim. And the first animal that a female gives birth to is a sacrifice. Because these are powers of productivity. The first one, it expresses the productivity of the power. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but if you go into a business, sometimes you'll see a $100 bill in a frame on the wall. You think, that's $100. What's it doing on the wall? What's the guy, nuts? And underneath, you'll see it says the first $100 we made in this business. That shows we're making money. That shows we've created something that people want. And that's precious. That symbol is precious, that it's doing what we set it up to do. So here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I want you to appreciate the fact that I am the source of productivity in the world. I'm the source of multiplicity in the world. And therefore, I want you to bring as a sacrifice the first fruits of vegetation, animals. So it's an expression of a certain relationship and a certain place in the world that the sacrifice is supposed to accomplish. And by the way, I haven't yet trained myself carefully. The word sacrifice in English is not comparable to any of the Hebrew words that are used. The word korban means something that brings you close. The karev in Hebrew means to bring close. And the word mincha means gift. And gift and sacrifice aren't the same. When I say I give a gift, I don't thereby imply that I became any poorer. Maybe by giving the gift, I lower my tax bracket and I make a profit. That is the issue. Gift means I give it to you. Sacrifice means I lose something. There's nothing in the idea of korbanos that carries the idea of sacrifice, that you lose something. If anything, you gain. Now, one of the things that the sacrifice shows is that the very existence of each thing in the world is to serve the purpose that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants for it. Other than that, it has no claim on existence. So we have the story of the animal that ran to the slaughterer, sort of pushing itself in to be slaughtered, because there could be nothing greater for that animal than to be slaughtered and to be used for a sacrifice. That would be by far the greatest possible thing. Or to be used as kosher food for a Jew who's going to use that food to give himself the energy and strength to do service of the Creator. There's nothing higher that it could possibly accomplish. And that could be carried out even to the extent of showing that not only must a human being give up his life rather than transgress what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, but a human being could give up, only when commanded, obviously, not voluntarily, could give up his life to show that all of what he is belongs to Kadosh Baruch Hu. Let me give you another intermediary case. This is a difference of opinion between the Rambam and Tosfos. But what happens when the non-Jews are threatening a pogrom, and a Jew could volunteer himself to be killed by them in order to prevent the pogrom? We actually have a case like that in the Gemara, where some crime took place, and the Romans thought they came from a certain city where it took place, and two brothers volunteered to confess to the crime, although they had not committed it, and the Romans killed them, and the place avoided a pogrom which would have killed many more people. Now, you're not required to do that. Whether it's allowed to do it or not, and what the conditions are, is a matter of discussion. But there too, the person says, well, what's the alternative? No one else is volunteering. So, what's the alternative? The alternative is that a lot of people are going to die. I think it's worthwhile that I should prevent that a lot of people should die. Lahav, you read A Tale of Two Cities? Right? How does A Tale of Two Cities end? It's two twins, and one of them, one is a great noble figure, and the other one's as they call it, ne'er-do-well, someone who's in trouble all the time, and they catch the great figure, and they're going to execute him, and the twin brother disguises himself and says, "Can I visit him, in the cell before they go and kill him?" And somehow he gets permission, yes, and then he says, "Listen, let's switch clothes. I'll go instead of you. Because you're a good person. You're a great person. And maybe this is the only worthwhile thing I'll do with my whole life. It's my opportunity to do something worthwhile with my life, to die in your place." And I think you can hear where he's coming from. I don't want to have lived a totally worthless life. I can show that by dying instead of you. So, if you can hear those cases, maybe you can begin to hear the idea that here's a sacrifice. Odessa talks about this. There's a sacrifice which would show that the whole of one's existence is only in terms of what it can contribute to Kodesh Baruch Hu's place in the world. And when a Kodesh Baruch Hu commands you to offer your son as a sacrifice, that's what it's supposed to show. And I forget who was Odessa quoting there. I think he's quoting the Maharal. Why then was it called off? It was called off because the people of the generation were so degraded, they would have associated with Abraham the same type of human sacrifice that you have in idol worship. And then it wouldn't have had its effect. The whole point was to make an effect on the world, to demonstrate something to the world. And it would be misinterpreted and degraded, similar to what we said about the first 9 vis-a-vis the 10th. They're going to be misinterpreted and degraded. So he called it off because of that. But the idea of it wasn't the wrong idea. He didn't call it off like I told you the other day that in Reform Judaism because it's unthinkable. No, he called it off because we misinterpreted it. It's not unthinkable. Okay, so that's another element of the Akedah that plays that role. And the third thing I wanted to leave with you is this. Maybe you know that in many Siddurim, maybe all, at the beginning of the Siddur, the Akedah is printed. The story is from the Torah is printed there. Why is it there? That many people have the custom of saying it every day. Why would that story be chosen? You know, there's hundreds of pages of Tanakh, 1,000 maybe. Why would that story be chosen to be there, to be said every day? And one of the reasons is that in miniature, Abraham's position with respect to the Akedah is repeated over and over again. Things happen and we don't have explanations. We don't have explanations. And they're painful. They're difficult. How should we deal with them? So, if you look at Abraham and say, he didn't know he was going into, he thought he was going to sacrifice his son. And I told you, this was very painful for Abraham to the extent that at the end, he said to Hashem, swear to me you won't test me again. Kovash Rachmav, he had to conquer his mercy for his son. And he said, swear to me it won't happen again. So Abraham walked into something that was extremely painful and didn't know the reason why. And that repeats with us over and over again. So if you have Abraham's example in front of you and you say, look, the end of the story shows us that everything works out well in the end. Even though he couldn't have known it in the initial stages, we have to understand that everything will work out well in the end. Even though in the initial stages, we can't figure out how and why that should happen. And knowing, so then the question is asked, well, how did Abraham do it? How did Abraham manage to do it if it was really so difficult and so self-transcending? Where did the motivation come from? Now, I mentioned to you the other day what the Rambam says, that when you have an experience of prophecy that's more real than logic and and sense perception. In the ancient world, those were the two most solid pieces of knowledge. 2 + 2 is 4, and you're sitting at a table. And he says, it's more real than that. I want to add something, because I think it's true, and I think it helps, especially from the modern point of view. Let's think of Abraham's experience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu up until that time. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, at the age of his 70s, leave your homeland and leave your culture and go to, eventually he came to the land of Israel. Eventually you'll have a child, and for decades he didn't have a child. And then at the age of 100 he did have a child in a completely miraculous manner. In between there was a war, and his nephew was captured by a consortium of 4 kings, and Aaron decided that he has to free his nephew by force, and he gets together a group, and he attacks, and in one night defeats the 4 kings who had made a sweep of the whole area and conquered the whole area. In one night he defeats them. He's in Egypt at the beginning, and the Pharaoh takes his wife into the palace, and there's a plague on the palace, and the Pharaoh comes running and says, well, you have to leave, and gives him a lot of honor. And Abraham's had a certain amount of experience with Hashem, that Hashem is very powerful, that he knows everything that's going on, that he clearly favors Abraham and will do things for him in supernatural ways in order to make things happen for him. Abraham engages in trying to influence a whole society of people and makes many, many, many converts to believing in Hashem. Abraham is surrounded by a life of interactions with the Creator that go beyond his understanding and go beyond his conceptions of how the Kodesh Baruch Hu's power works. Now Kodesh Baruch Hu says to him, I want you to do something, and this time you're not going to understand it. I think it wouldn't be unreasonable for him to trust, after all of this, it's got to be okay, even though I can't dream of how it could possibly be okay. I usually use the following analogy, and I'm going to date myself. I don't know if you've heard of Albert Schweitzer. He was a musician and a doctor, part of the intelligentsia, and he decided he was going to Africa to treat natives with the amount of medicine that he could bring with him, help them, just to help them. Now, this didn't happen, but it could have happened. Imagine that he's there and he's setting their broken bones and stopping their bleeding and curing their infections and saving their babies, and they obviously appreciate it. And they have no clue how he's doing it, this white man who knows all these things. And then comes a case where one of the natives has gangrene in his foot. So Schweitzer says, I'm sorry, we're going to have to cut off your foot. Cut off my foot? Doctor, how am I going to chase the animals through the underbrush? How am I going to defend against enemies? Cut off my foot? What happened to you, doctor? All the time you've been helping us, been saving us, restoring us to health. Now you're going to cut off my foot? What's the matter with you? Why aren't you like you are all the rest of the time? And the Schweitzer says, that's the best I can do for you. Well, what should the native do? Should the native say, he must be drunk. He must be taking drugs. Maybe he's going crazy. Because clearly he's not doing what he did before. Or could he say, look, he's living with us. This isn't the Ritz, boys and girls. This is, the jungle. He's living with us. He could clearly go back to a life of luxury and accomplishment. He obviously cares about us. If he says it's the best he can do, then maybe it's the best that can be done. And there can't be anything else done. Even though I don't see why, and to me it's inconsistent with everything he's done until now, still, if he says he's earned my credibility. So I think that there is that aspect of it also. In addition to what the Rambam says, there's also the idea of his consistent experience with the Kodesh Baruch Hu that this is going to take place. And that gives him the ability to do it. Now, I think when we try to apply Abraham's example, we should look to the same thing. We should say that look at the history of the Jewish people, look at the things that we've gone through, look at the disasters that we've lived through and survived, look at the productivity, the creativity which accompanied it, and say, obviously, that no other culture from 3,000 years ago that's extant today, let alone 3,800 years going back to Abraham. Obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is investing in us and preserving us, even with the terrible things that do happen. And we have to understand that they do serve a purpose, even if we can't see how they serve a purpose. I don't think that that's irrational. One last thing I want to show you. Let's go back to the text. It's the end of chapter 22 in Genesis. So, page 105, after it's all over, verse 19 says, and Abraham returned to his young men, and they stood up and went together to Beersheba. Abraham stayed at Beersheba. Of course, the attentive reader says, isn't somebody missing here? Huh? What about Isaac? Abraham came back. Okay, good. Okay. What about Isaac? I'll show you something almost shocking. Yeah, take a look on page 717. This is the end of the book of Leviticus, Vayikra. And here is a passage of warning of what will happen if we don't live up to the Torah, the disaster that will fall us. But, let's take a look at 44, in the middle of the page. Despite all this, while we be in the land of their enemies, I will not have been revolted by them, nor will I have rejected to obliterate them, to annul my covenant with them, for I am Hashem their God. Now, 45. I will remember for them the covenant of the ancients. Oh, I'm sorry. Look at the top of the page, 42. I'll remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham I will remember. I'll remember the land. Count this on your fingers, boys. I'll remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham. I'll remember the land. How many things is he remembering? 4. How many times does it say, I will remember? 3. Wow, that's worthy of comment. You know, if you want to save space, you'll say, I'll remember A, B, C, and D. A, B, C, D, and A, B, C, and D. If you don't want to save space, I'll remember A, I'll remember B, I'll remember C, I'll remember D. No. Say, I'll remember 3 times for 4 things? Why would you do that? Now, which one is missing that I'll remember?
Isaac.
The covenant with Isaac is missing that I will remember. And then here, the rabbinic sources comment, you only have to remember things that aren't sitting in front of you. And the way it's put is, Isaac's ashes are in front of me always. Meaning something happened to Isaac up there. Something happened. And if you look at the rest of his life, you can see certain effects. And he didn't really return. Not the same one who went up. He didn't return. Now, that's one thing. And the other thing, 105 again, back to 105. It says, '19 again. Abraham returned to his young men. They stood up, and that's why Isaac is missing. They stood up and went together to Beersheba. Now, we made a big deal about together, right? When they came to the mountain, it was together. When they're halfway up the mountain, it was also together. Do they agree? Are their minds of one mind? And so forth and so on. We pointed out that when they left, it doesn't say together, even though they were together. Why would it say together at the end? So here, I was very happy that it occurred to me, and Cook says the same thing. It says, Abraham came back from one of the greatest spiritual experiences in the history of the world. An experience like that has to change a person. He has to have achieved some great spiritual level. These 2 servants, if they're slaves, which they could have been, Joshua might have different ideas, still, he could be together with them. He didn't get spiritualized out of the world, spiritualized so much that he couldn't relate to them. No. He came back and could be together with them. And this is a crucial Jewish idea, that the spirituality that you achieve for yourself is for the sake of relating to other people. It's not for the sake of isolating yourself in a cave and meditating. It's a gift that's meant to be used for others. And here's just the first place, and we have other places where it says the same thing. Yeah.
If that's the case about you basically, well, sorry, let me double check before I ask the question. You're basically saying that the more spiritual, the heightened spiritual state is to spread light through the world.
That's right.
Right. Okay, so what's the point of living here? Because obviously you teach us, and then we go out back into the world, or some people stay. But then what's the point of living in Yerushalayim, where there's plenty of people who don't spread.
Suppose
anyway, by the way.
Okay, suppose you have a professor of medicine and say, "You're a doctor?" I say, "Yeah." You believe that sickness is something that we need to address and help people? Yeah. So why aren't you curing ill people? I'll tell you why. Because I'm training other people to cure ill people.
No, but I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about you. I'm saying you teach people here.
Right?
So it's clear what your purpose is.
Yes.
Of how you have emissaries for your light, so to speak. I'm sounding very Chabad right now.
Oh yeah.
I'm sympathetic to that.
Perfectly all right.
But I'm saying I'm saying in general, why would people live here then? Most people probably don't do what you do.
Oh, I see. Well,
Because they're
let's take it a step back. I have a whole thing on this. Let's take a step back. Let's say someone who's lobbying the legislature to appropriate more money for medical research. You're not curing anybody, and you're not teaching anybody to cure anybody. Yeah, but I'm providing the money with which they can treat other people so that those people can go out and do that. So the question is, there's a whole chain of participation in making this happen. Someone I knew very well, he's not in this world anymore, used to be very charitable to Kiruv, like the Ohr Somayach and other similar places, went to Rav Shach and said, where should I put my main charity efforts? Into the established yeshivas or into the yeshivas that are reaching out to try to influence people? And he said, if you don't have the established yeshivas, you won't have those yeshivas either. They are offshoots of the established yeshivas. But without that foundation, that's not going to exist. It's like somebody looks at a tree and he says, I understand you put nets over the fruit and you make sure that the fruit is protected from the sun and so on. But why digging in the ground? Because I'm protecting the roots, that's why. There won't be any fruit if they're not there. So there's a lot of different links in the chain of support. And just doing mitzvahs in the land of Israel is a big part of the support. It's a good question.